Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. To the South Carolina fans, many of y'all have been rocking with the boys, the last couple of months, and there's been a lot of highs for this program, especially when it comes to talent acquisition, not only on the recruiting trail, but in the transfer portal as well. The last 24 hours, not so much. And I think there's a couple of conversations I want to get into in terms of, hey, where does South Carolina go from here? It started yesterday afternoon with Carter Meadows committing to Michigan. It continued Monday afternoon with PJ Dean committing to Georgia. I mean, PJ Dean, we all woke up Monday morning, thought, hey, maybe he's heading to South Carolina. I want to point out one thing really quick. And, I'm not trying to sunshine pump because we're going to talk about the reality of where South Carolina is right now in the 2026 cycle. The mere fact that South Carolina was in it the way they were in it for PJ Dean, I think that tells you like where this program is in terms of the pull that they have on the recruiting trail. Because you look at PJ Dean and say, hey, one, Georgia's had their way recruiting the defensive line for the last half decade. More importantly, PJ Dean, his older brother, played for Georgia, is now going to the NFL. That was going to always be a very difficult recruitment for South Carolina to go out and win, in the mere fact that, hey, South Carolina was arguably the leader in this recruitment at times. I think it tells you the pull that South Carolina has created. We've talked a lot about it. South Carolina's checking a lot of boxes, right? Number one, in 2024, they just showed you that, hey, we can compete at the highest level of the SEC. Number two, we are starting to pump out some NFL talent to the draft. And then number three, hey, we're winning a lot of football games and we're playing a lot of young kids while we're doing it as well. Lenore Sellers, redshirt freshman, Dylan Stewart, true freshman, Josiah Thompson, true freshman. This program's attractive to these kids at the high school ranks. Because of that, South Carolina has decided to take some big swings in the 2026 cycle. I mean, you look at the official visitor list for South Carolina, there's not a lot of non-blue chippers that South Carolina is pursuing currently. These are some big boy recruitments that South Carolina has gotten into, and then in some cases have won for as well. Where does South Carolina go now with some of the bigger names? Look, I ain't going to say off the board. I don't think South Carolina's give up on, especially on a guy like PJ Dean. I don't think South Carolina's going to give up on him until pen hits paper in December. But where does South Carolina go from here? That's the conversation I want to get into. Before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys. And look, is this episode as fun to do as throwing on the commitment sweatshirt that I had ready for PJ Dean? It's not. A lot of y'all been rocking with the boys through the thick and thin. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into it. Now, this is where you always have to start. When you want to enter these monster recruitments that South Carolina has entered, you're going to miss on some and you're going to lose some. Next man up. What are the next names on the board that we have to go out and close to? And again, that conversation gets into, hey, we had significant resources set aside that we were going to push towards Carter Meadows. Same thing goes for PJ Dean. How do you allocate those resources to build the most ideal class in 2026? Look, we have Landon Duckworth that I still think is, trending to South Carolina. I ain't no insider, but I haven't heard anything to make me think that Landon Duckworth ain't going to be a Gamecock. I think the next biggest name for South Carolina to monitor here is Noah Clark. Committing on July 2nd, South Carolina has the momentum. You need to hit on Noah Clark. And I very rarely use that phrase because, at the end of the day, the high school recruiting trail, you can always rebound and you can always pivot. I look at the middle of the defensive line and say, hey, South Carolina learned, especially in this offseason, that finding these kind of bodies in the transfer portal, very, very difficult. So if you want to have a deep and talented line of scrimmage, especially in the SEC, you got to grab these guys at the high school ranks. Aiden Harris, a little bit undersized, but a penetrating three-tech defender that can play the edge. He's a perfect fit for what South Carolina wants to do on the defensive line. Noah Clark probably ain't going to be the penetrator and playmaker that Aiden Harris is. Talk about dirty work defensive lineman, 6'4", 340. That's Noah Clark. And those kind of bodies are crucial in the SEC. And so you miss out on PJ Dean for now. You got to make sure you go land Noah Clark. Because I think the process that South Carolina is trying to carry out here is, hey, we have a lot of confidence in our ability to attract talent in the transfer portal. And Shane Beamer has shown us that South Carolina is very good at evaluating the right guys to bring in, which not a lot of other programs across the country can say. So we don't need to bring in this 30-man class if we're going to continue to use the portal as effectively as we do. But especially for the line of scrimmage players, both on the offensive line and the defensive line, got to get these kids out of the high school ranks. So I think Noah Clark, number one, becomes a massive priority over the next 48 hours to make sure he's committing to South Carolina. Obviously, we talked about Landon Duckworth. You have Samari Matthews committing July 11th, I believe. There are still some names that South Carolina probably leads for that you got to go out and close. I would focus my attention on the line of scrimmage, though. As much as I think Samari Matthews is going to be a dog, it's really hard to build your line of scrimmage through the transfer portal. And so I'm looking at a guy like Darius Gray. And it sounds like, hey, LSU might have the momentum, but South Carolina has at times led in this recruitment. Make sure you're doing everything you can. And if that takes, hey, allocating some resources that was supposed to go to Carter Meadows to back to Darius Gray, that probably makes sense for South Carolina. I think what I would stress is the positions that are difficult to address in the transfer portal. Really the main two, offensive line, defensive line. Make sure you go close out for your top targets at the high school ranks. Because the reality is, hey, you don't land a running back in this class. South Carolina has shown us they can go to the portal and go grab a running back. You need a wide receiver in the portal. That's a position you can address. The two positions you can address are on the line of scrimmage. Now, number two is probably expand the board. Up until this point, that board has been small for South Carolina. South Carolina says, hey, we ain't going to recruit 150 different kids. We're going to recruit about 50 of them, but they're going to be some of the best 50 players in the country. Well, as you miss out on guys, you sometimes have to go down on your board. And here's what, again, the reason that, look, I'm not trying to sunshine pump, but the reason I'm not pressing the panic button either, this is why South Carolina won the games they won in 2024. Their evaluations for some of those 3-star prospects, understanding, hey, what kind of guys that are flying under the radar can come into our program and help us. They've been one of the best programs in the country when it comes to evaluating those kind of guys. That's probably what South Carolina has to do. They're really good at it, and you've missed on some of the guys you wanted to hit on. Well, now you got to go expand your board and probably lean on the senior year tape to find those guys that, hey, kind of the diamonds in the rough. South Carolina is going to have a lot of flexibility late. It's one of those programs that, to me, there's a lot of continuity ahead. There's a lot of programs across the country that are going to look a heck of a lot different in 12 months. I'm talking coordinators. I'm talking head coaches. I look at South Carolina and say it's going to look the same in 12 months. So you talk about late in the process, expanding your board, or even trying to flip targets late. That could be a process for South Carolina. And here's the thing with the flip targets. If South Carolina wins a lot of football games in 2025 and which I think they will, and stacks what they did in the 2024 year and kind of shows the college football landscape and these kids at the high school ranks that, hey, 2024 was real. It wasn't just a blip in the radar. It is real. That is what South Carolina is as a program. You probably got a lot of pull in the month of November. And so that's another option for South Carolina as well. The way I'd best frame it is make sure you get the line of scrimmage players out of the high school ranks. If you need to dip your toes into the transfer portal for some wide receivers or defensive backs, that's really easy to do. That's where I see South Carolina. One thing I've learned, and I've been a fan of college football my whole life, and I've reacted to the recruiting trail plenty. It's almost never as good as we think it is when things are going well. And it's almost never as bad as it is when things aren't going well. It's been a tough 24 hours for South Carolina. I don't think the momentum has suddenly stopped for this program. We'll see what Shane Beamer and South Carolina decide to do over the next couple of weeks in terms of building this 2026 cycle. It's a small class. It's probably going to be a small class, but you still want to hit on some of these names that are still on your board. Hey, we'll break down the commitments as they come in. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.